It is one of the biggest decisions a president can make, and in 12 days, Mr. Trump's pick for the Supreme Court will face a contentious confirmation hearing. In the run-up, Brett Kavanaugh has been making the rounds, meeting with U.S. senators to ask for their support. We want to take a look at where Kavanaugh stands on some of the key issues in question. Tonight, we begin with the most politically charged, abortion. Here to help us walk through his record and what he's been saying to senators, our Capitol Hill correspondent, Lisa Desjardins, and Joan Biskupik, a Supreme Court biographer and an analyst for CNN. Hello to both of you. So it looks as if Judge Kavanaugh has been busy in the last few weeks, Lisa, because you've been following this very closely, talking to senators, trying to win them over. What do we know about what he's been saying himself to them about his record on abortion?
We've learned a lot in the past 3 days, rather. Today he had 6 meetings alone. And I think the person who best described what he's been telling senators on abortion is Susan Collins. She met with him on Tuesday. Let's listen to what she said he told her.
We talked about whether he considered Roe to be settled law. He said that he agreed with what Justice Roberts said at his nomination hearing, in which he said that it was settled law.
Now, this seems to be kind of a mantra for recent Supreme Court nominees, and it's something that Kavanaugh is sticking to. We hear Democrats and Republicans alike say this is what he's telling them.
And so hearing this, Democrats who are inclined not to support him, most of them, what are they saying?
Right. They say that it doesn't matter if it's settled law. The question is whether he's willing to overturn it. Chuck Schumer himself said it's settled until it's unsettled. And we also hear Democrats pointing to something about Justice Gorsuch. Justice Gorsuch used this same standard, saying that he saw Roe as settled law. But Democrats like Chris Coons today point out that Justice Gorsuch recently voted to overturn a 41-year precedent, a court case from the Supreme Court in 1977 about labor law, that in that venue is seen sort of as a Roe v. Wade of labor. Gorsuch did vote to overturn that. So Democrats are concerned that whether it's settled law, these justices could be willing to overturn them.
So, Joan Biskupik, to you, as somebody who's been watching the court for a long time, watching these nomination process, first of all, when a nominee to the court speaks about something being settled law, is that something we take to the bank?
No. It sounds nice, it is nice, and judicial nominees repeatedly say it, but it's just sort of stating the obvious, frankly, that if you have a precedent from 1973, which is when Roe v. Wade made abortion legal nationwide, of course it was settled. And then in 1992, the court reaffirmed that. But as Lisa just mentioned, the Supreme Court has overturned precedent, 4-decade-old precedent. Right. And I think what he's doing, what we've seen through the years, is a nominee sort of trying out some lines. When he meets with a senator, might experiment with, what would be said. And we could see how Susan Collins received that quite positively. And it was interesting that he referred to Chief Justice John Roberts, because Chief Justice John Roberts did talk about the importance of precedent and of Roe v. Wade being settled. But he also said, when I think Senator Specter, being among the many senators who questioned him on Roe back in 2005, said, I don't want to talk about what would change over the years. I don't want to talk about individual cases that might come up. And just for the record, we do have a ruling. We have 2 rulings on abortion from Chief Justice John Roberts, one in 2007, and then more recently where he did undercut the right.
Well, let's talk a little bit, because you've been looking very closely at this, poring over, you and other journalists, poring over Judge Kavanaugh's, first of all, his rulings. What has he written in opinions that tell us anything about his view on reproductive rights?
Sure. Well, Judy, he sits on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, which usually doesn't handle these kinds of individual rights. But he did rule last October in a case that involved a young, pregnant migrant who had crossed the border, was being held in detention, and the Trump administration did not want to allow her to get the abortion that she wanted immediately. He dissented from the majority on the court that said, no, Trump administration, you're putting up an undue burden before this young woman, and they ruled in a way that allowed her to have the abortion. He dissented, saying the government has an interest in fetal life here. He did not say that he would overturn Roe. He said Roe is settled law, but he stressed that it wouldn't have been a burden on this woman to have waited and gotten a sponsor. The government was right to try to make her wait and consider it.
And I want to come to something else, but before I do, Lisa, this is something that Democratic senators in particular have been talking about.
Right, I think that's right. This is a big issue for everyone, and I think when you look at the lay of the land, there are 3 Democratic senators that are key votes here. Of course, the margin in the Senate is very close, and these 3 senators voted for Justice Neil Gorsuch, so we're watching them carefully. On abortion, it's interesting. All 3 of these senators have states that either have right now an abortion trigger law, so that if Roe v. Wade was overturned, automatically abortion would be illegal in their state. That's North Dakota with Heitkamp. Or in the case of West Virginia, there's a ballot measure that would say that abortion is illegal in the state. So there's conservative-leaning states on abortion, but talking to their offices, it's interesting. They're saying to me that they are getting more pressure from their voters on other things. For example, Heitkamp says her farmers are worried about tariffs. And there's other senators who say the pressure on Kavanaugh is not about abortion, but about Trump himself. Do you support the president or no?
Fascinating. I do want to come back to you, Joan Biskupic, though, on this other aspect of Kavanaugh's record, and that is, what has he written in articles, what has he said in speeches about Roe v. Wade that we can glean something from?
He has talked about his judicial heroes. The first one, when he was a young law student, was former Chief Justice William Rehnquist, and he cited Rehnquist's dissent in Roe v. Wade. Back in 1973,
Opposing the majority.
yes, right. Now, he did not say, I agree with it, but he was holding him up as a hero, and he's done the same with the late Justice Antonin Scalia, who was also an opponent of abortion rights. I think what we'll see beginning on September 4th, when the hearings begin, is a man who again, expresses regard for precedent, talks about what's settled, talks about how it's a jolt, as Chief Justice John Roberts had said, to society when precedent is overruled. But I think once he gets up there in a lifetime position, all bets are off.
But there's little doubt that they're going to be asking him about these 2 things: the case about the young
Yes.
immigrant woman who was pregnant, and about certainly praising Justice Rehnquist in dissenting in Roe.
That's right. They'll ask him, then they'll ask him again, then they'll ask him again. And right now, Judy, I bet what he's doing is rehearsing his answers to try to satisfy senators enough to get the majority vote.
And I know one office where the senator is listening to the audio of that Garza case on that young migrant abortion case, because we have audio of that. That's something they're studying. What did he himself say verbally, and how did he say it?
Well, as you said, Lisa, the abortion will not be the only issue to come up, but it certainly is going to receive, we assume, a fair amount of attention from these senators. And we'll be talking about other issues of import as we look at the Kavanaugh nomination in days to come. Joan Biskupic, Lisa Desjardins, thank you both.
Pleasure.
Thank you.